I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either going to be okay.
No, stop!
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
The absolute irrefutable evidence of cataclysmic flooding in that area, and it plays a very important part in the book. North America was the epicenter of a global cataclysm between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. And when you see it through Randall's eyes, you get it immediately.
This whole subject, since you've been on my podcast and you've been on the podcast, is something that comes up. I mean, I'm not kidding. 4 or 5 times a week, someone will grab me and ask me, when is Graham coming back on again? When's Randall coming back? And when I tell people that you guys are coming on together, the people will start freaking out. So, we've been saying before this that people are taking time off work. They're having little viewing parties. So to you people out there, we're just as excited as you are. So, tell me what's been going on. So tell me the Washington State thing. Tell me what you guys saw and what picture evidence and what was revealed.
I'm going to pass that one to Randall first off.
Well, we were basically traveling. What we did was we traveled from Portland to the Twin Cities. And what we did was essentially followed the southern margin of the Great Ice Sheet for the most part. And what we were looking at was this evidence that the whole ice sheet had undergone this massive, catastrophic, sudden meltdown. And basically what we saw in the landscape was evidence that was oceanic level currents flowing off the ice sheets. In fact, the geologists that have been looking at this use a term called sverdrup, which was originally contrived to, and it's a million cubic meters per second. And they originally came up with it to talk about ocean currents like the Gulf Stream and so on, not realizing that down the road it was actually going to be applied to currents that were flowing over the land. But that's what we were looking at.
Spell that word?
It's named after the scientist that first came up with the concept. It's sverdrup, sverdrup.
Oh.
It's 100 million. A million cubic meters per second.
Whoa!
Which is very difficult to even envision.
But when you see it on the landscape, I mean, for example, there's a place called the Camas Prairie that Randall took me to, where you see these kind of ripples in the ground, and they look a little bit like current ripples on the beach, but actually they are current ripples, but they're 50 feet high and hundreds of feet long, and that receding flood left those ripples on that landscape. Then above the town of Wenatchee, there's a gigantic boulder which didn't come from Wenatchee. It weighs 18,000 tons, and it got there in an iceberg the size of an oil tanker, which grounded against that side of the valley. The floodwaters receded, the iceberg melted away, and it left this humongous boulder there. And actually, there's thousands of them, thousands of these gigantic boulders just scattered across the landscape of the Pacific Northwest. And it all speaks of this cataclysmic, horrendous, humongous flood that happened 12,800 years ago.
18,000 tons. You just threw out some giant numbers. That the meters per second and the 18,000 tons is a ton is 2,000, so 18,000 tons is 18,000 2,000s.
Yeah,
so it's 36 million.
Yeah, if you want, I can pull up some.
You know what that is?
Yeah, something of that order. Let's just say really fucking big. I mean, an enormous thing. And the fact is, if there was just one, it would be spectacular. But there's thousands of them, and
they're all just washed away by the
so
water.
when the ice caps suddenly melted down, and we know now that happened because of the impact of several fragments of a giant comet back 12,800 years ago. It released a huge flood of meltwater, and that meltwater it was jostling with icebergs, huge icebergs, and many of these icebergs had rocks enchained within them. As glacial ice moves, it snatches up and enchains rock and keeps it inside. There's a name for them. They're called glacial erratics. And so they're in these icebergs, and the icebergs are jostling against each other, and the flood has ripped up whole forests by its roots, and there's mud and there's rubble and it's rumbling, and you see it all on the landscape up there.
And this is all carbon dated to this time period?
The dating is very secure. Very secure.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh my God.
If we look here at the image, now this is not from the catastrophic flood we're talking about,
obviously.
But interestingly enough, this was a 100-year flood that happened in Georgia back in 2004. And what we had was a floodplain that got overtopped for the first time in decades, and it left these current ripples here. And I use this slide to show what we're used to on the scale of phenomena that we would normally see, this kind of phenomena.
So this is a normal, very large, major storm.
Yes.
That, makes sense.
This was Hurricane Ivan when it came through in 2004. They referred to it as a 100-year flood.
Right.
So
this is a massive storm, but it's nothing out of the ordinary, really. It's it's rare. But
yeah,
huge.
it's rare. What you'll see here is, I've got a measuring tape here. You're going to see the wavelength is about 3 inches, the amplitude, the vertical height of these things is about 3/4 of an inch.
And so these are all, what we're looking at is all dried dirt that has sand.
It's been rippled. It's been carried along, swept along in this water that was over this floodplain, which was 2 feet deep.
Mm-hmm.
Carried along, and as the water declined, it deposited this sand and then rippled it as the final stages.
And we're looking at this at what year? How long after the storm was this?
This was a week or two after the storm, because within a month, this was all obscured by wind and everything. So now, just so you've got this by comparison, we'll go to this. This is what Graham was just talking about, Camas Prairie. And what you see here is there's ranches out there, and you've got this 10-mile-long field of these gigantic ripples. And if you look up in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, you can see some of these ripples. They're, like Graham said, they're 100 to 300 feet in wavelength, and they're up to 50 feet in amplitude. And the water that flowed through here that deposited this was over 1,000 feet deep.
So this is fractal. You get it in the small scale. In the first image Randall showed, the same phenomenon there with a flood just 2 feet deep, and then we come to this humongous testimony to what happened 12,800 years ago. And it's easy to drive through it and not really figure what you're driving through, but once you look at it and realize what happened, it really dilates the imagination.
So this must have been just an absolutely enormous event when it happened, and really
unimaginable. And human beings lived through that, and it changed everything. They're called extinction level events. These global cataclysms wipe the slate clean. They change everything, and they set a new order in motion. A new order follows that. So a classic example is the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. That turned dinosaurs into chickens, and they were gone, and it opened the way for mammals. And our distant ancestor is a sort of 65 million year old shrew, which was going nowhere until the dinosaurs were wiped by a cosmic impact. And then they began to evolve, and here we are. So dinosaurs became chickens, and shrews became human beings.
That's almost harder for me to imagine than this. This is very hard for me to wrap my head around, but that we came from a shrew 65 million years ago.
That's
almost harder.
That's the story of evolution. One can buy into it or not, but certainly mammals were going nowhere before the dinosaurs were swept out of the way. And the point I'm making is that these events, which are called extinction level events, they reset the clock. They make everything start again. And this is why what happened in North America 12,800 years ago is so important, because that period, the whole period was 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. That period stands right in the foundations of what we think of as the beginnings, the origins of civilization. And yet mainstream archaeology and historians have not taken it into account. And I don't blame them for that. This is new information. This is new science that's been mainly published in the professional journal since 2007. It's very intriguing new information, but we cannot any longer trust the established model of the origins of civilization, since it does not take into account an extinction level event right in the foundations. And that's why I say the house of history appears to be built on foundations of sand.
Now, this hasn't been adopted yet, but is it resisted? Has the mainstream? It is. It's being resisted.
Whenever you propose a cataclysm of any kind, it's a curious thing. I don't know whether it's psychological or something more sinister than that. But whenever you propose that and present evidence for it, you can be sure that you will be descended upon by a furious crowd of critics. And the group of scientists, more than 30 of them, very significant mainstream scientists who've been presenting the evidence for the comet impact, have had a fight on their hands since 2007. But I can say with confidence, and I detail it at length in the book, that they have won that fight. Every criticism that's been made of their work, they have refuted, and they've come back with new evidence, sometimes 3 or 4 papers a year. And it's a compelling case, and we can't ignore it anymore.
Well, it seems to me as a casual observer, I mean, more casual, probably more into it than the average person, but no, not even close to you guys, that as this evidence piles up, like the nuclear glass that they keep finding it's about 12,000.
That's one of what they call the impact proxies.
Yeah.
See, what we got to consider is that we are looking at objects which might be a mile wide that are coming into the atmosphere at 70,000 miles an hour, and they are hot. You know, some people will remember Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 that hit Jupiter back in 1994. That was a small comet, just 2 kilometers wide, broke into about 20 fragments. The explosive power of those impacts on Jupiter was 300 gigatons. Now, let me put that into perspective. The entire world's nuclear arsenal, were it to go off at once, would be 6.4 gigatons. So you're looking at something beyond imagination. The power of these impacts is absolutely colossal. Numbers don't do it. Just imagine a world on fire, a world changed forever.
The explosion that hit Jupiter was about the size of the Earth too, right?
No. This was a comet.
I mean, the impact.
Oh, the
plume.
Yes.
It was like the size of the Earth.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we're looking at something that when it happened, what's the timeline around? What the calculations around? Somewhere around 11,000 years ago.
Well, there's actually a period. This is an episode rather than a single incident, and that's part of the mystery. First off, there are the impacts 12,800 years ago. That causes this cataclysm centered on North America, but global. And global temperature plummets. People who talk about global warming or today, what happened, the change in temperature 12,800 years ago was just stunning.
And this is undeniable. Randall's detailed this in depth the last time he was here with mainstream scientific data that's irrefutable.
Absolutely.
Core samples, ice core samples.
Absolutely.
Along those lines.
And they'll just call it the Younger Dryas, and it's a 1,200-year period. Temperatures plunge at the beginning, massive animal extinctions, and then 1,200 years later, equally suddenly, temperatures shoot up again dramatically, and there's another series of floods. So the period is 12,800 to 11,600 years ago, and I don't know if Randall agrees, we're sure that the comet was the cause of the first event 12,800 years ago. I think other bits of the comet were responsible for the second event as well. I think there was an impact in ocean which threw water vapor up into the upper atmosphere, caused a greenhouse effect, and created that sudden spike in warming and that huge flood.
Those 2 warming spikes show up very dramatically in the Greenland ice cores. And I pulled these up, I think, in the last meeting, but it would be good to reference it again. And basically what you see here is warming spike number 1 is here, and warming spike number 2 is here. And these were extreme, we're talking about 10 degrees centigrade, roughly, in perhaps a year or two. And this translates into about 17 or 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're talking many times greater than the warming of the last century or two. Instantly, basically just like that. And this what we see here brackets this whole episode of this period of transition from the glacial age to this nice warm Holocene interglacial age that we're in now. And Graham brought up about how this sits right at the very foundation of our modern history. And if you look at whether it's the dispersion of languages, the beginning of agriculture, the first cities, the domestication of animals, what you see over and over again is the same dates showing up, 8, 9, 10,000 years ago. And in this model that we're describing here, we're not really seeing the genesis of civilization. We're seeing the rebooting of civilization in the aftermath of these events.
The only thing that makes sense. This is we have now the data that makes sense of what previously has been very mysterious and unexplained evidence.
So for folks who are not aware of both of your work, to me this is so fascinating because I've been a fan of your book since, God, I mean, more than a decade, right? When did it come out, in the 90s?
Well, Fingerprints of the Gods was published in 1995, which is 20 years ago. And Magicians of the Gods, the new book, is the sequel to Fingerprints. And I've written it because there's just this massive new information that changes the whole picture completely.
Fingerprints of the Gods, I started reading sometime in the late 90s and just became engrossed in it and fascinated by this concept that civilization, and as you put it, that we are a species that has amnesia, and that we just forgot what our past was. But the two of you together is what's so fascinating because it puts this puzzle together. Your obsession with asteroidal impacts and these massive extinction events, and your knowledge of this ancient architecture that doesn't make any sense, and these ancient construction methods that seem to differ, and the timelines. And for people who aren't aware of the whole story behind it, the erosion on the enclosure of the Sphinx, where they made the Sphinx, has thousands of years of rainfall erosion. That doesn't make any sense because the last time there was rain in the Nile Valley was like 9,000 BC, which is right somewhere around there.
Yes, really, the climate of Egypt has been as dry as it is today for about the last 5,000 years. So you have to go back. You actually have to go back to this period, to this Younger Dryas period, to get those heavy rainfalls that could have eroded the Sphinx in the way it is. And I want to pay tribute to the work of John Anthony West and Robert Schoch from Boston University, because they broke this story way back in 1992. And at the time, the Egyptological establishment, of course, were furious that anybody dared to suggest that the Sphinx might be 12,000 years old. The Egyptologists said, we know the Sphinx dates from 2,500 BC. Actually, one of the things I've done in this book is look at what the Egyptological case rests on. And it's a fairy tale. It rests on nothing. It's kind of ideology. It's their idea of how things should be, rather than any real factual evidence that puts the Sphinx at 2,500 BC. And the geology puts the Sphinx much, much older. Now, the argument of the archaeologists at the time was, and anyway, the Sphinx couldn't possibly be 12,000 years old, because if that was the work of some unknown culture 12,000 years ago, we're going to find lots of other monuments around the world that are 12,000 years old, and we don't find any. Well, that was 1992, but now we're in 2015, and the site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey has been discovered with its gigantic megaliths, a deliberately buried time capsule, buried more than 10,000 years ago and created 11,500 years ago. And if you can make Göbekli Tepe, you can make the Sphinx. We are finding the fingerprints of this lost civilization popping up all around the world. Indeed, on any archaeological site where you can be absolutely sure of the dating proves to be much older than we have been taught by archaeologists. They recently discovered a huge megalithic site 40 meters underwater in the Sicily Channel. It's been underwater for best part of 10,000 years, which means that megalithic site is at least that old and maybe much older. And we can be sure about the dating because it's underwater. Likewise, we can be sure of the dating of Göbekli Tepe because whoever made it deliberately buried it, sealed it, and no later organic material got in to contaminate the carbon dating record and give falsely young.
And if they didn't bury it, someone else during that time period buried it.
Like somebody buried it.
Right.
They went to
we don't know when it was built, but we know it's buried at least 10,000 plus years
the dates
ago, right?
that are coming out of it now, the earliest days. Now, it's important to be clear that there's much more of Göbekli Tepe under the ground.
Right.
There's actually about 50 times as much as has already been excavated, which is under the ground still and not been dug up yet. They know it's there because they've been over the whole site with ground-penetrating radar, and what they're seeing is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these huge 20 to 50-ton T-shaped megalithic pillars buried under the ground. Somebody went to enormous lengths to create this site. They also, or somebody else, went to enormous lengths to bury it. And actually, Göbekli Tepe means pot-bellied hill in the Turkish language. And that whole pot-bellied hill that covers this site was artificially put there by human beings, teams of men and women with buckets filled with rubble and stones, filling it in and covering it up.
So strange. And there's no guesses or theories as to why they did this?
Really not. There's not. It's just a fact that it happened because archaeologists and geologists can tell from the nature of the material that covers these pillars that it isn't a natural sedimentation, that they were deliberately covered up.
Well, it's got to be satisfying to you guys. Two obsessed crazy men come together and your theories lock in like puzzle pieces and ha-ha. And
well, you've got the right word there, because
obsessed crazy men.
This
definitely. It's great. I say that with all love and respect.
Put my hand up to that. Absolutely. You've got to be a bit obsessed to stick with something like this. I came in for an enormous amount of criticism and flack when I published Fingerprints of the Gods, and I'm human. It hurts when people say really bad things about me, but what I've learned is you just have to persist. You just have to keep going, even if your ideas are shouted down by, the established holders of knowledge in our society. If you feel strongly enough about those ideas, you've got to hang with them. And I've hung with these ideas for more than 20 years now. And what we're seeing is just a mass of new evidence that basically vindicates the notion of a lost civilization. See, if I may say, Göbekli Tepe, the earliest dates they've pulled out of the ground now, which they think is the foundation of the site, is 11,600 years ago. And that is really significant because 11,600 years ago was the second episode of cataclysm at the end of the Younger Dryas. And we know it was accompanied by massive global flooding.
Is it possible that this was covered up then? That it wasn't covered up intentionally by people, that it was covered up as a part of that cataclysm? No,
it was made after the cataclysm was over. And archaeologists have a problem with this because the site is very sophisticated. It contains the world's first perfectly north-south aligned structure, and you can't do that without precise astronomy. In fact, there are huge astronomical implications to the Göbekli Tepe site. The architecture is massive. And you see, the problem archaeology has is that up till now, they've been teaching us that megalithic sites like this, astronomically megalithic sites like this, are maximum of 5,000 to 5,500 years old. And suddenly we're looking at a site which is far bigger than any other megalithic site known in the world, which is at least 6,000 years older than any other known site. So how do they explain this? Our ancestors are supposed to have been just hunter-gatherers at that time, nomads following the game, not with a sophisticated societal organization that would have specialists who had these knowledge, who had these skills, who could put this work together. So the fairy tale archaeologists are now telling about Göbekli Tepe is that one morning a group of hunter-gatherers woke up somehow divinely inspired with the complete knowledge of megalithic architecture and how to organize a workforce and how to bring them to a site, which, by the way, there's no water on that site, and to put this whole proposition together. And at the same time, exactly at the same moment, 11,600 years ago, we suddenly get evidence of agriculture spreading all over Turkey. It's like Göbekli Tepe is a center of innovation, and associated with it is the birth of agriculture in Turkey. And to me, this looks like a transfer of technology. It does not look to me like a group of hunter-gatherers woke up one morning magically equipped with the ability to invent agriculture and create a megalithic site like this. It looks to me like people who already had that knowledge came into that area, settled there, and tried to pass on their knowledge to the local people, and maybe used Göbekli Tepe as a kind of university or initiation center to train and teach people in those skills. That's what it feels like. And another point is that same date, 11,600 years ago, is the date that Plato gives us for the destruction and submergence by flood of the lost civilization of Atlantis. And up till now, archaeologists have dismissed the whole Atlantis story, and they regard it as kind of pseudoscience, although it comes from Plato. But Plato said very clearly that this happened 9,000 years before the time of Solon, and Solon lived in 600 BC. So Plato is telling us Atlantis went down 9,600 BC, 11,600 years ago. Exactly the date of the second spike of the Younger Dryas cataclysm.
If you look here at this graph, we see...
Randall, pull this sucker up close to you so that you get a little bit more...
We can see here, these are studies of sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age. And rather than it being a smooth curve, which was the old model, which you can see represented by the dashed line, it's two enormous spikes. And that second spike, you see MWP-1b, that's meltwater pulse 1b. And you've got meltwater pulse 1a. Meltwater pulse 1b is dated precisely to 11,600 years ago.
This is crazy. It's like everything aligns. Everything aligns. The nuclear glass that they're finding in the core samples.
Well, yeah,
that's all the same around the same time.
This was the point I wanted to make. When we talk about these objects coming in at 70,000 miles an hour, they are packing an enormous amount of kinetic energy and heat. And when they hit the ground, there are distinct products left in the soil, and those include nanodiamonds. They're created by the shock and the impact. You can only see them. They're under a microscope. They're tiny, tiny, tiny things, and carbon spherules. And the melt glass, which is just basically identical to trinitite, which is the melt glass that you get from nuclear explosions. They're called impact proxies, and there's a distinct layer of the soil all around the world dated to 12,800 years ago, which contains this stuff and also contains the evidence of continental wildfires burning. And I think Randall might want to address that issue of continental wildfires and why they happened.
All these images are beautiful, but let's note that most people are just listening to this. So if you're just listening to this, those images that Randall put up on the screen show these enormous straight up and down spikes of the water level rising, which... It has to be caused by some ocean level rising, which has to be caused by something extremely dramatic. Like that, just looking at that, like, wow, what happened there? That is nuts.
That's the melting of the ice sheets. The sudden, rapid, catastrophic meltdown of the ice sheets, dumping millions of cubic kilometers of water back into the ocean basins.
And how those little dashes on the bottom, the numbers, how many years do they represent? Like that spike that goes straight up and down, the largest spike, how much time does that represent?
Well, you've got two here that basically represent the margin of error in the dating. The earliest version of it is the spike you see on the right. The latest version, as you see, is on the left. And it varies between about 14 and 13,000 years for the first spike. The second spike is dating now to about, like I said, about 11,600. The numbers across the bottom are KYR, means thousands of years before present.
Oh.
So you can see 9, 10, that would be 10,000 years ago.
So essentially it seems like our Earth went through like 1,000 years of horror.
1,000 years of hell. It's really impossible to imagine what the world was like then for the people who lived in it. And I think it makes sense of why all around the world we have a story of a global flood. This is not something confined to the story of Noah in the Bible. This is a universal story of a cataclysm that changed the world and wiped away a former golden age and left us with the present order of things all around the world. And secondly, all around the world, and this is intriguing, there is a universal fear of comets. Now, why should we be afraid of comets? We see comets up in the sky, they whiz through, they have this nice tail, they look pretty. Why should we be scared of them? But every culture in the world has myths and traditions that associate comets with disaster. And I think it's pretty obvious why, because this comet impact 12,800 years ago was remembered by the survivors, and they passed that memory down to their children and their children's children, and it's still with us today, and it's now, we know, based on something very real.
Well, it seems like to me, as a layperson, with all this evidence and all this evidence that correlates, it's all corresponding, it all seems to fit together, it would seem that this would be something that a lot of mainstream scientists and archaeologists would be extremely interested in. Like, why would they try to ignore something like
The
this?
first thing they've tried to do is to get rid of it. This is often the case where new information emerges that contradicts established theories. And it's a strange phenomenon in science because we like to think of scientists as rational and reasonable people. But the fact is that when you get very committed to a particular model, to a particular idea, I think you start to connect your own personality to it. And any attack on that idea becomes an existential attack on you yourself.
How sad.
And it is sad because again and again, what we see is the new facts being dismissed because they don't fit the existing theory, where in fact what we should be doing is modifying the existing theory to explain the newly discovered facts. And this is a problem in the whole history of science.
Well, I remember when I first became aware of that problem when I watched the documentary on the mysteries of the Sphinx, where Dr. Robert Schoch met with some archaeologist in Egypt. It wasn't Zawi Hawass, it was a Western guy.
Yeah.
And he met with this guy, and they were explaining their theory about the erosions of the Sphinx, and he was laughing at it. But openly mocking it. Like, what evidence? Where's this evidence? But it was the way he did it was just so riddled with ego.
Yeah.
I was like, well, how could you? First of all, the concept of 11,000 years ago, when you start thinking about 11, that's a long time.
You bet.
And what evidence really would be there other than stone?
Yeah.
It seems to me that it'd be very little. I mean, if whatever fragments of pottery you'd be lucky to find.
You're lucky to find it.
But looking for some massive evidence that clearly shows beyond any shadow of a doubt, well, here it is. Like, oh boy, you're asking for a lot from 11,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And you have something pretty substantial right in front of you, and he's mocking it.
Exactly. This is why I've come to view archaeology and history as a kind of more ideology, really, than science. There's an ideological view about how civilization developed, that we have this long, slow, gradual, politically correct rise from the Upper Paleolithic, from the hunter-gatherers through the Neolithic into the first cities, and we go on, and then we develop technologies, and here we are, the apex and the pinnacle of this whole story. And gosh, we're so proud of ourselves and our achievements, and we think we're wonderful, and we praise and value our technology. I've got nothing against technology, but there's a hint of arrogance in this. There's a hint of pride that it was all about us. And I think that once you start introducing this new view of history, that there may have been an earlier civilization, a high civilization, which was utterly wiped out by a global cataclysm, why it contradicts that ideological position. And you find yourself in ideological struggle with archaeologists. And that's why, so for example, if my book is handed over to any archaeologist to review, they're just going to piss all over it. They're not even probably going to read it. They're just going to say Hancock. They say again and again, Hancock is a pseudoscientist. Nobody should listen to him. That's their system of attack, is to first of all devalue you so much that nobody will ever listen to you. And that's why I appreciate the support of just real down-to-earth people out there who are looking at this information and finding that actually, the story of history we've been taught doesn't make sense. And this new information does make sense of it.
Well, this new information, in my eyes, it's so substantial. And there's so much of it. It's so much of it fits together. It's incredibly difficult to ignore, and much more so than when that documentary on the Sphinx was created. That was quite a while ago. And Heston was the narrator of it.
And at that time, we were sticking our necks out, putting that information forward. I was in that documentary as well.
Yeah.
But today things have changed, and what I see is the archaeological mainstream in a state of denial about this information. They just don't want to recognize it and absorb it, but they're going to have to recognize it. It's going to be forced upon them, whether they like it or not.
It's so sad because you count on these people to distribute the information, but their egos get involved in things. And if you've been teaching something for a long time, then it turns out you gave out master's degrees on things that were completely incorrect.
Absolutely.
It's
absolutely.
It's got to be
and something else. Although this sounds a bit conspiratorial, I think the existing view of history is part of a mind control system in our society. It's something that we're presented with, that we take in with our mother's milk, and we're never supposed to question. I think if you control the past, you do actually control the present and the future as well.
So, but you mean if you have an absolutely established narrative that you're teaching and you're unwilling to look at any possible variations to that, you're saying, like, almost from an authority position, we know what happened and we know where we're going.
Yeah.
But if you say, shit, we don't know what happened, then it's, well, then who are you to tell us where we're going?
Exactly. And it starts to raise questions over everything, actually.
Right.
Yeah, and we're kind of in this mode now where there's a very large growing political agenda around the idea that humans are the sole cause of global change and that we're the dominant force within this whole process. Now here we come along and we're saying, well, no, there's actually been forces unleashed on this planet that really utterly dwarf anything we've done yet. What does that do to that paradigm? You see, that's what I think what we're coming down here to. Part of the scenario now is that humans are engaged in causing the sixth great mass extinction, as we talked about in one of the previous. And now we're coming along and saying, well, wait a second, here's something from outer space that has come in and caused the last great mass extinction on Earth. And what's interesting, I found, is that quite a number of the scientists that have been in the opposition to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis have been in the forefront of pushing this scenario of human-caused mass extinction and blaming the extinction of the great megafauna that died out 12,000 years ago on human hunters, which, again, we talked about that, and I consider that ludicrous, that, Paleo-Indian hunters using spears are going to cause the extermination of 10 million woolly mammoths before they could even reproduce, along with 120 other species of megafauna.
Well, 65% of all mammals in North America were wiped out somewhere around that time.
Wiped out.
Mega mammals.
Which
is over 100 pounds in body weight, essentially.
Yeah.
And
actually more, like 75%. 75%.
It was almost instantaneous, right? I mean, it was over a course of a very short period of time.
Very short period of time. The scientists who have been diligently working away in this field since they've published their first paper in 2007 have just brought out a new paper, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, July 2015, where they're doing a statistical analysis of all the sites where the evidence comes from. And what that tells us is that this is what is referred to as an isochron. This event 12,800 years ago. We're not looking at the effects of 100 or 200 years of events. We're looking at something that happened effectively in a single afternoon across 50 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface.
Ooh, that gives me goosebumps. A single afternoon all over the world, everything changes forever. And it's fucked for 1,000 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I'd like Randall to address this issue of continent-wide wildfires, because we do see this in the stratum, that when you get this superheated ejecta coming down on ancient primal forests, consider the effect.
This is Murray Springs, one of the Clovis sites, and this is what is known as the black mat layer.
Where's Murray Springs?
It's in Arizona. And it's southern Arizona, and it's near the Clovis site, which is New Mexico.
Clovis impact site?
Well, no, the Clovis site was where one of the first places in North America where human remains were found in association with extinct megamammals, such as woolly mammoths. And it's just outside of Clovis, New Mexico.
They refer to them as the Clovis culture because that culture was one of the casualties of this comet impact. The comet impact is often referred to as the Clovis comet.
Okay. Yes. And many of these Clovis sites, and there's been over 50 of them around now documented over North America, I think about 2/3 of them have this black mat layer, which shows up very clearly in this image. Now, that black mat layer is black because of the considerable amount of carbon soot that's in it. So in other words, right there, that's the evidence of your wildfires, is that this blanket of soot over the continent that left this black mat layer. And below that black mat layer, you'll find extinct megamammals. Like here, you see the yellow arrow there points to the black mat layer. Now, if you look up, you'll see how it's more buff colored.
Mm-hmm.
That was the color of all of this, but the soot that was in that black mat layer has dispersed and colored the other adjacent layers. But you'll notice the bones below are the bones of extinct mammals. The bones found above it are extant or still existing mammals. And that layer separates these two domains of extinct mammals and extant mammals.
Just a very clear line.
Yeah, and you can see it shows up so clearly right.
To people who are listening to this, when we're looking at the original image that Randall showed, it's almost like an Oreo cookie. Like there's just a clean line, and then there's the white filling underneath. I mean, it is as clear as day. And what are we talking about? Like how much fire and for how long creates this area?
Well, you're basically talking about burning up a considerable portion of the biomass of North America, in unglaciated North America, to do this. And it's
So you have the ice cap north of roughly Minnesota, and south of it you have a heavily vegetated area covered with primal forests. And that's what goes on fire. And the reason it goes on fire is because when these impactors come in, they generate a huge amount of heat, and what is called ejecta, superheated ejecta, is thrown up into the upper atmosphere, and it falls down all over the continent, and it sets the world on fire.
Oh, God.
now at the
Perspective is so difficult in this.
It's a
This is it, because there's numbers that you guys are throwing around, and there's concepts you're throwing around that I have to pause when I go, wait a minute, I got to try to fit this in somewhere. But it's the whole world on fire.
Yeah. This is why I've written this book, because it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling material. And up till now, most of the information has been confined to the really rarefied scientific journals. Very little of it has got out into the public domain. So one of the things I've tried to do is to put this together into a form that's very accessible to the general public, because we all need to know about this. This is our yesterday. This is our background. This is where we come from. The present order of the world has descended from that moment.
And what is the mainstream explanation for what we're looking at here? Like, how do they describe this?
Well, the mainstream to me now is Firestone and West and
yeah. And when Randall says Firestone and West and Kennett, he's talking about some of the lead scientists who have presented the evidence for the Younger Dryas impact, because they have triumphed, although they were attacked, and sometimes viciously, and frankly speaking, sometimes dishonestly. They were attacked, but they defended themselves so well, and they kept on bringing in new data and new information that actually now we should be regarding their view as the mainstream. Yeah, there are a few critics still hanging in there who would like human beings to have been responsible for the extinction of all the mega mammals, and who just are in denial about the climate change at that time. But they're no longer the mainstream, in my view.
Well, one of the problems with that theory is what you showed the last time you were here, the evidence of these woolly mammoths that died instantaneously, and that there are massive fields of them. That something had to happen, and ones really with like their legs broken, just bent over from the impact. Like it's pretty clear something went down, and all of these pieces point together, and including looking at this, which is this is blowing my mind. This idea of the world on fire,
Well, there were some places that apparently got spared.
Yeah, like Australia or something.
Well, Australia actually suffered a major mass extinction, but earlier. Probably from some previous event, maybe 30,000 years ago. But
just trying to figure out where to go if it happens again.
East Central Africa seems to have been one of the places of refuge, because if we look at the distribution of mega mammals in the world today, where do we find the greatest concentration? In Africa, right? Well, Africa has retained 90% of its mega mammals from the Pleistocene, whereas North America lost 75%. If you go back to North America during the Ice Age, there was as many mega mammals, if not more species, than there is in Africa today. But what we see is that extinction relates directly to habitat loss. And basically, not much survived in either North or South America. North and South America were both severely affected by these events and lost 75% of their mega mammals. Eurasia lost depending on where you go, between 30 and 50%. Africa only lost about 10% of them. And that's why you see so many big animals still in Africa today. And a lot of them, I think, probably dispersed from the area around the Great Rift Zone. It seems like in a lot of the areas actually where we're finding early hominids is in that same area. That seems like for whatever reason it was spared somewhat of the extreme severity that the rest of the planet suffered.
It's an interesting situation, because when we look at the arguments of history and archaeology, very little of the story is told in North America. as it's taught in schools and universities today. They look at places like Sumer in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, and further down in South America, some of the great cultures of the Andes. But it's like North America is missing from the map. They talk about hunter-gatherers coming in here across the Bering Strait, and there's still a dogged faction of archaeology that wants to maintain that just happened about 13,000 years ago, and that there was no human beings in the Americas before that, although the mass of contradictory evidence is overwhelming that dogma as well. It's obvious that the Americas were populated long before that, and those populations did not only come in across the Bering Strait, they came in other ways as well. And then there just seems to be nothing for a very long time, and North America's kind of left out of the story of civilization. Well, now I think we know why. Because North America was at the heart of this disaster. It was at the absolute epicenter, and the slate was completely wiped clean here. And that's what archaeologists are looking at. They're seeing a wiped clean slate, and they think they're seeing the beginning of something. Actually, they're not. They're seeing the movement on of something after a horrendous disaster.
Wow, it's so hard to wrap my mind around this idea that for literally 1,000 years, the Earth was just riddled with asteroidal impacts and fire and nuclear winter because of the dust and mass extinction of. It's so hard. The numbers that you're throwing around, the ideas behind it. It's very difficult for folks to.
Can I put something in there that brings it home in a way? See, this event 12,800 years ago, we know now it was caused by fragments of a very large comet, and the work suggests that comet may have been more than 100 kilometers in diameter originally when it entered the inner solar system. See,
that's like 62 miles, right?
Yeah,
is that somewhere?
A big old comet. These comets, they come in from deep space.
How big is the one that killed the dinosaurs? Like 5 miles?
Well, that's thought to be 10 kilometers wide. That object.
Miles.
That object, 6 miles wide, and
10 times that big.
Yeah, these things come in from deep space. There are reservoirs of comets. There's a place that they call the Oort cloud, which is just so far away that it's almost impossible to imagine it. But it contains trillions of comets, and often they're in stable orbits. They're not coming into the inner solar system. But as the solar system orbits around the center of the galaxy, our galaxy is the Milky Way. And we are in orbit around the center of the galaxy. Our sun, our solar system, everything is in orbit around the center of the galaxy. And that orbit is not only in the plane of the galaxy. Imagine a dolphin diving up and down, coming out of the surface of the sea, descending below, rising up again. That's what the solar system is doing. And those passages through the galactic plane disturb the Oort cloud, and they send comets winging in to the inner solar system. Thank God for Jupiter. Jupiter, with its huge gravity, is the great protector of the Earth. We should all wake up every day and say, thank you, Jupiter.
Thank you, Jupiter.
This doesn't happen too often, but every now and then a comet gets past Jupiter's guard and comes in and enters the inner solar system. And the calculations show this happened about 20,000 years ago. And that comet went into an orbit that crosses the orbit of the Earth twice a year. We are still crossing the orbit of that comet twice a year, and there is still a very disturbing amount of debris within it. It's called the Taurid meteor stream. We've actually just finished our latest passage through the Taurid meteor stream. The Earth passes through the Taurid meteor stream twice a year. It takes 12 days to pass through it because the Taurid meteor stream, more numbers, is 30 million kilometers wide, and we orbit at the rate of 2.5 million kilometers a day. So 12 days to pass through it. And in the last 11,000 or so years, we've been lucky. We've been passing through this 30 million mile wide stream. We've been passing through bits where there are just filaments of small debris. But the evidence is that it is actually full of large rocky debris, including one object that may be as much as 30 kilometers in diameter, sitting in that Taurid meteor stream. So it's like, I compare it to like strapping on a blindfold and crossing a 6-lane highway and just hoping that you don't get hit by a truck. You know, that's what it comes down to. And we've been lucky so far. Actually, the most recent definite impact from the Taurid meteor stream was in 1908, and that was in Russia, in Siberia. It's called the Tunguska event. As I said, there's 2 passages through the stream, one in June, end of June, early July, and one in November. And this was at the end of June. An object not very big, about 100 meters in diameter, came out of the Taurid meteor stream, entered the atmosphere of the Earth, and actually blew up in the sky. It was an airburst about 5 kilometers above the ground. It flattened 80 million trees across 2,000 square kilometers. I'm sorry, I keep using kilometers. Right? Almost 2,000 square kilometers of the Earth's surface. That's an area about the size of the city of London. If that impact had happened over an inhabited area, hundreds of thousands of people would be killed. And we would all be paying much more attention to the Taurid meteor stream today than we are presently doing. We should be paying attention to it.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
So we just got super lucky that it hit in a very lightly populated area. And it didn't even hit. It blew up in the sky above it. Pull up, see if you could find some image of Tunguska, because it's pretty staggering.
It's staggering.
And it literally looks like there was like a matchstick forest that someone pushed over, like a series of dominoes or something.
Yeah.
Oh,
God.
Jamie
pulled
that one up.
Jamie's a wizard. Kids on the ball. Look at him over there.
Yeah.
God.
So here's the thing. We are still interacting with the debris of this comet that changed the world 12,800 years ago. It's not something remote and distant. It's part of our daily lives, and it is something we should be paying attention to. And a number of astronomers are very concerned about the Taurid meteor stream. Now, I don't want to be the one who goes around the world, wearing the sandwich board, saying that doom is nigh.
Literally, the sky is falling.
Yeah. I don't want to be that. I don't want to manifest that. I don't want to bring that down. I actually want to say that there's something positive to say about this. We are almost certainly the first civilization that's ever existed on this planet that has the capacity to intervene in our cosmic environment. Should we choose to do so, we can make sure that we are not the next lost civilization. We can make sure that life and light continue on this planet and that our story continues. But we need to pay attention to our cosmic environment. And a number of scientists are now saying the same thing, that it's irresponsible of us to pretend that impacts like this, they just happen every 100 million years. We don't need to worry about them. We are intimately connected with a force that can change life on Earth, and we have the power to do something about it. So I would suggest, instead of wasting, trillions of dollars globally, creating weapons of mass destruction to destroy one another and to manifest the hatred and fear and suspicion that are just whizzing around the world right now, we should be looking at a grand human project, a cooperative effort to make our cosmic environment safe. And we have the technology now. It's just a matter of choice. It's just a matter of budget. Trillions of dollars are spent on arms, and roughly $20 to $30 million is spent a year on so-called space watch. It's a ridiculous chump change, given the nature of the threat and the implications.
About the same as the cost to run one McDonald's restaurant for a year is what we're spending on studying the cosmic environment in terms of threats.
That's a hilarious comparison.
Yeah.
What a resourceful little freaky animal people are. If you really stop and think about it, almost wiped off the face of the planet 10,000, 12,000 years ago. And then we reach a point where here we are in 2015, and through all these inventions, we're starting to rediscover what our history truly is, and rediscover the history of the Earth and its interplay with all these cosmic forces.
Modern humans have now, 190,000?
Yeah, the earliest definite anatomically modern human skeletal remains date back about 196,000 years. There's some other plausible ones at about 210,000 years. Nothing before that. It doesn't mean that we were not anatomically modern before that. It may just mean that archaeologists haven't found the data yet. But we can be sure that people like you and me have been around for about 200,000 years with the anatomically modern form and the anatomically modern brain. So there's a mystery right there. Why did we wait 190,000 years to establish the first civilizations? It raises the possibility that we could have done so much earlier and that the slate has been wiped clean.
Think about it this way, Joe. My grandfather was born in 1895. The main mode of transportation, aside from railroads at that time, was horseback, right? His grandfather, would have been born pre-Civil War. So in 5 generations, we've gone from the very first railroads, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, to where we are now, in 5 generations. Now, if you go back 200,000 years, say 196,000, and we divide that by 25.
I love when Randall breaks out.
We're looking at almost 8,000 generations of humans.
Wow.
Yeah. Now think about that. Within 5 generations, we've gone from 90% dominant, agriculturally based, subsistence farming, right, feudal system, to where we are now. But now we've got 8,000 generations of humans on this planet. Who knows what we may have accomplished in the past? But once you put this perspective, and you got to understand that the catastrophe we're talking about 12,000 years ago, while all the evidence suggests it was the most severe, probably at least within 5 million years, because the last time we can find a species loss equivalent to the terminal Pleistocene species loss was 5 million years ago, the Hemphillian event it's called, which then I would then consider that again as a measuring stick for habitat loss, which would in turn be a measure of the severity of whatever happened. But the point is that in the time that we humans have been around, there have been multiple catastrophes of a global scale, not as severe as the one we're talking about here. But certainly the framework of this planet has been shaken numerous times. And in 200,000 years, we've had probably 4 great glacial cycles that have come and gone. Now, just a glacial cycle alone, I mean, think about that, what the ice will do to the landscape and dropping sea levels 400 feet. And now during an ice age, you've got to bear in mind that probably the most habitable place to be on the planet is going to be on coastlines, along the mouths of rivers and so forth. What happens when all that ice melts and sea level comes up 300 or 400 feet? And it's going to pretty much erase most of the evidence of human habitation. Although, and I think I talked about this last time, and you would probably concur with this, the importance of marine archaeology.
It's extremely important.
Yes.
But again, unfortunately, marine archaeology has its eye off the ball. Most of the resources in marine archaeology go into shipwrecks, looking for shipwrecks.
Right.
And I get that. It's really interesting to look at shipwrecks, but there is a prejudice in archaeology which says there could have been no interesting civilization before 12,000 years ago. So since those lands that were submerged by rising sea levels have been underwater for 10 or 12,000 years, we're not really interested in human habitations there. And this is the problem. A very focused effort needs to be made to look at these lost lands. I can put that in miles. 10 million square miles of the Earth's surface, roughly Europe and China added together, was submerged by the rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age.
Jesus Christ.
That's what's missing from the record. And again, we're talking about wiping the slate clean. And Randall's right. Those ice caps that sit on top of a continent, which are mountain high, they're going to just grind to powder anything that lies below them. So was there a civilization there before where the ice cap formed? Who knows?
Right.
Yeah, a mile high of ice.
Yeah.
Even more than that in some cases. Over central Canada, it might have been as much as 2 miles.
2 miles.
2 miles of ice.
Just pushing across the ground like an eraser.
Exactly.
Just
in crushing the surface of the ground down. I think in our discussions of Atlantis, we covered that a little bit. Crushing the surface of the land down by perhaps a couple of thousand feet. Isostatic depression. You remember the geology lesson I gave you last time?
Yes.
About isostatic depression, and we discussed how at this very moment your ass is demonstrating an important geological phenomena of isostatic depression, sitting on that cushion that you're sitting on. And if you were to stand up, what happens when you stand up? The cushion comes back up, doesn't it? It's exactly what happens, and you can almost picture the planet breathing in effect. The ice is released from the continental surface. The continental surface begins to rebound. The weight is transferred back into the ocean basins, and there has to be what's called rheology, which is the study of the distribution of the inner mass of the Earth, requires that there be compensation. So if in one area of the surface the land is rising, somewhere else it has to be subsiding. And the obvious place would be that as you transfer the weight from the continent back into the ocean basins, that the ocean basins are going to subside. And this brings us, to the whole question of the scientific veracity of a sunken landmass.
I think you have an interesting point on the Azores in this sense, because there you have this massive, it's like a seesaw. There you have this massive weight pressing down on the North American continent, and suddenly it's lifted. That massive weight pushed down North America, but it lifted up other areas, the other end of the seesaw. Then the weight comes off. This end goes up and the other end goes down. Yes. And suddenly you get the possibility of the submergence of a landmass. It just falls under the sea.
And there is actually considerable empirical evidence suggesting that there was massive post-glacial subsidence along the mid-Atlantic ridge.
Which is where the Azores are.
Yeah. And which is pretty much where Plato
said Atlantis was.
Yeah.
Wasn't there some discovery of some concentric circles that were submerged somewhere near Spain that they considered to be a possibility?
Yeah, that's
of Atlantis?
Cadiz. I don't think
is that near Spain?
Yeah, it's. I think it's much more recent.
Okay.
Much more recent than the information we're looking at.
So it's just another port that was submerged.
That was submerged. There could be a lot of reasons why this happens. Actually, it's happening in the UK where I'm from, because the ice sheets in the UK were on the north of the UK over Scotland, and they were pressing Scotland down, and they caused the southern part of England to rise up. Then when you take those ice sheets off, the southern part starts to go down. So that's places like the Isle of Wight in the English Channel. They're sinking beneath the sea because of this. Still, the effect of that rebound is happening today.
That's called the glacial forebulge, where outside the glaciers, the land is pushed up.
This speaks to how people have a hard time accepting some of this new information. I have a friend who's a scientist, and the last time you were on, she said to me, "Did you have a climate denier on your show? A climate change denier?" And I said, "He's definitely not denying it."
No.
Yeah. But some people, that's all they hear when you bring forth a non-mainstream point of view or a controversial perspective. Instead of considering the possibility, it almost immediately gets dismissed as...
Well, this climate change thing is another ideological struggle. Yeah, sure, climate change is taking place, but what are the causes for this? Are we so sure that it's all caused by human beings? I would say there's very good reason for humanity to clean up our act.
Absolutely.
In lots of ways, regardless of the issue of climate change. We're abusing Mother Earth. We're living upon this planet like parasites and destroying it. We thoughtlessly create these gigantic pools of pollution. We're crazy enough, insane enough to actually invent nuclear weapons and long periods of detonate the bloody things. This is there's lots about our behavior that we need to fix because it's right to fix it. Philosophically right. We should not behave that way. We should not behave that way to one another. We should not behave that way to planet Earth. But to say that we need to fix our behavior because of global warming, that's an ideological argument. And that argument remains to be properly tested. Yes, global warming is occurring, but are we the cause of it, or is something else, some grander scale cosmic effect involved in this?
We talked about that considerably, and I noticed in a lot of the comments from our last discussion, most of the critical comments were people, not liking the idea that I had questioned the dogma of global warming. But there are some facts that you can't escape. The global warming began 200 years ago. And we see that the glaciers from the Little Ice Age began to shrink back in the early 19th century. Before there was, a century before there was any significant human contribution of CO2 to the atmosphere. So something was driving that warming that began. And it's important to realize that the Little Ice Age was probably the coldest period since the end of the Great Ice Age. In fact, the data overwhelmingly supports that, and that the glaciers grew to their largest extent around the planet in 10,000 years. So when we're talking about glacier recession, it's important to understand what the baseline is. Our baseline in this case is the biggest the glaciers have been in 10,000 years. And what's interesting, and this is going on right now, as the glaciers have been receding, geologists and biologists and glaciologists and so forth have been studying the landscapes that are being revealed as the ice shrinks back. And you know what they're finding is the remains of forests that had been overrun by the Little Ice Age glaciers, and peat bogs and things that would suggest that prior to the onset of the Little Ice Age, those valleys that were filled with ice from roughly 1400 to 1800 were actually forested, because the ice came down and overran these forests, and now it's receding back and revealing that there were forests there. So that tells you that, at some point, probably going back to the medieval warm period, those areas that have been glaciated during the early part of the 20th century were actually free of ice. And so, the climate has been extremely dynamic. That's the thing we have to emphasize, all by itself without any help from humans. And this is what I've been saying, is that we have to look at that and realize that, humans are a factor. Somebody I did post and said all the other factors I had mentioned as, ocean currents and wind currents and geomagnetic field and cosmic rays and volcanism and all that had all been investigated and dismissed. And the only thing left was the human contribution. But, to me, that's really, we're putting all our eggs in that basket, and that could turn out to be very dangerous, because we're so focused now on our own contribution that we might be overlooking the fact that there have been natural factors driving climate change over and over and over again. I mean, because I still have not heard any consensus on what has caused the planet to first go into an ice age and come back out of an ice age. And I think that what Graham and I are talking about actually presents a possible solution to what could have brought this planet out of the ice age, something on a grand cosmic scale. And the other point I think I'd like to make is that we have to really, to understand our planet as a system, we have to realize that it's part of a cosmic ecosystem. And the cosmos has been a much bigger player in what's been going on down here than has been previously understood or appreciated. And I think our ancestors probably did understand.
They did understand it. The focus on the skies, if you go back into ancient times, is so strong. This notion of as above, so below, that we are connected to the cosmos. This is something that we're tending to forget in the modern world, again, because we're so puffed up with pride. Anyway, we can't see the sky if we live in cities.
That's, I think, a big issue.
Light pollution is just like a haze up there. We don't see anything. So we're actually cut off from the cosmos psychologically, and that's a mistake, because we are part of this giant cosmic environment, and it affects us. And one of the way it affects us is the way that comets come into the inner solar system from time to time from deep space.
I was camping in Montana recently, and when you're out at night and you look at that night sky and there's no light pollution, it's just a totally different perspective,
isn't it?
And it gives you a different sense of where you are in the universe, because we're so, and it's not necessarily our fault. It's almost like we've put up a curtain over the heavens and we can't see through the curtain because we've decided that we like light and we like traffic lights and building lights and all this jazz, and we don't realize until we're out in the woods or in the wild, until you're in the wilderness and there's no light pollution, you really don't realize what we're missing and what we're sacrificing in order to have these lights. The view of the heavens, it's psychedelic in a way.
You bet.
Because it makes you feel like, oh my God, we're really flying through space.
And nice that Mother Nature has provided us with those plants that really help us to appreciate it.
I try to go every year to the Keck Observatory on the Big Island. I try to schedule my holidays as much as possible around the time where there's no moon, because it is unbelievable. Because the Keck Observatory is more than 9,000 feet above sea level. There's the visitor center, and then there's the observatories above, but you really don't even have to go past the visitor center. But they're the way they have it set up, they have these special street lights all throughout the Big Island with diffused lighting, so it doesn't interfere, it doesn't give you light pollution. And when you're up there, you go through the clouds, and the view is insane. It doesn't even look real. It doesn't even look real. Like, you see all the stars, you're like, this can't be real. How could this be up there every day and we don't see it? But what we've done is create all this incredible stuff, these streets and buildings and laptops and cell phones, and in doing so, we have robbed ourselves of a perspective.
Yeah, and it's weird because, we have this technology that enables us to go around the whole world and even go out into outer space. But actually, in a way, it's narrowed our focus. We focus in on the technology and its products, and we forget about the majestic cosmic and Earth environment in which we live. How sacred it is, how beautiful it is, how meaningful it is to all of us.
And that was the image that our ancestors always had.
Always.
That's probably why they concentrated on it so much.
Yeah.
And the things that happened up there were evident to them. I mean, because these days, how many people see meteors? Living in an urban environment, you never see that hardly, unless it's really spectacular. But you go out, like you said, in Montana, or one of my favorite places to go out into high desert country. And there it's the stars, almost you can reach out and touch them, I think that one of the most important things that we could do for future generations is part of our educational curriculum for young people is get them out of the cities, into nature, into the tremendous, where they can actually see the sky. Because, I mean, living in Atlanta, I'll talk to people, even grown-up people that have no clue. They couldn't find the North Star. They couldn't find the plane of the ecliptic if their life depended on it. We've become cut off from that level. And I think it's important for us to keep that, because our consciousness is linked to this greater domain. And we have segregated ourselves from that. And I think that there's something there, amazingly, it's a grounding experience when you get out and you begin to see the sky, and you can actually, begin to figure out and identify the constellations, to know where the planets are, to look in the sky. And
it's really good mental exercise.
It's
something worth anybody doing. Get to grips with all that up there, as the ancients did. It gets your mind working, and it may even have been used deliberately for that purpose in ancient times, kind of initiation system. If you can get this, then you move on to the next level. That's the kind of ideal.
Well, it was a critical part of education where it's very rarely even discussed today. Astronomy is so.
And look again at the ideology. So, for example, if you talk about astrology to any mainstream scientist, they're going to laugh in your face. Right. They're going to say pseudoscience, because they're so locked into this Earth-centered perspective which convinces them that the cosmos does have no effect on us. So how can changing patterns of the stars, which zodiacal constellation is sitting behind the sun at a particular time, how can that affect us? How can when we were born affect us? I don't think we should throw that baby out with the bathwater too fast. I think we're looking at an ancient science with astrology, and I think it's been heavily diluted and prostituted in the modern world. But if you go back to the antiquity, you go back to the real origins of this, and you start finding some very interesting information coming out. There's a fantastic book by a guy called Rick Tarnas called Cosmos and Psyche. And he's a real mainstream, a very major academic. And he's got into this, and he's shown that actually, astrology does have effects. So we should not deny our cosmic environment. That's the first thing we need to do, to connect to it. And we shouldn't close ourselves off to avenues of inquiry for ideological reasons. It's noticeable in this field of ancient history how archaeologists throw around words like pseudo-archaeologist or pseudo-scientist. That's meant to be an instant dismissal, just like climate denier. You call somebody a climate denier today, that's like saying, don't listen to anything that guy has to say.
Right.
Never listen to it again. These are ideological tools which are being used to straitjacket the human mind and to stop us thinking outside the box. And if there's ever a time when we needed to think outside the box, I would say that time is right now.
Isn't it ironic that in this time of more information available to the average person than ever before, that this also has coincided with our lack of appreciation for what's above us? It's very strange that...
It's a very curious phenomenon.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting perspective. As we're talking about how dynamic the planet is and how it's changed and how dramatically different, which it is. I mean, if we go back to the end of the Ice Age, you go east of here, out of the Mojave Desert, that was lush grasslands and forests. You go out here to the Santa Rosa Islands, out here, they were all forested with oak trees and beech trees and Mammuthus exilis, which was the pygmy mammoth. I mean, everything down here changes dramatically. But when we go out and we look at the sky, we're basically seeing the same sky that our ancestors of 20,000 years ago were looking at. And that's something to keep in mind, because there's a backdrop to all of this drama and change here below that's pretty much, for the most part, remained consistent. But within that backdrop of consistency, every once in a while, something shifts. And when it shifts out there, I think our ancestors knew that there was a direct consequence here below. And that's one of the reasons they were so obsessed with being able to track motion. All of these ancient observatories, from Stonehenge on down the line to, the mound structures here in North America.
And let's not forget Göbekli Tepe, profoundly astronomical site.
Göbekli Tepe, yes, these were astronomical observatories using the horizon essentially as a telescope, by which very intimate and intricate movements within that backdrop of fixed stars could actually be observed, possibly for predictive capabilities.
And how are the calculations made? Like when an archaeologist finds a site like Göbekli Tepe, how do they correlate the construction of the site with the constellation?
Well, first off, most archaeologists don't do that at all, because they just don't do astronomy. They don't get it. Their eyes are on the ground at their feet.
Right, two different disciplines.
Because astronomy is not relevant to them, they project that onto the past and imagine that it was not relevant to the past. And that's one of the big mistakes, I think, that archaeology makes. There are people called archaeoastronomers who are looking at the astronomy of ancient cultures, and some of them have done very good work. But really, there are certain key indicators. The alignment of the site, what's it pointing at? And does that alignment change down the ages? You can sometimes establish that a particular axis of a particular temple in Egypt, for example, was shifted over a period of 2,000 or 3,000 years several times. And why? Because they were tracking the changing rising point of the star Sirius, which they connected in their system of ideas to the goddess Isis. They were tracking that rising point, which changes because of changes in the sky. I mean, long story short, the Earth wobbles on its axis, and that, since the Earth is our viewing platform from which we observe the stars, changes of orientation of the Earth in space do change the rising times of particular stars at particular times of year. And this was clearly tracked by the ancients. So you can say that if you find anywhere a monument that is perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west, you can be absolutely sure that astronomers were involved. If it's tracking the rising sun on the spring equinox or on the winter or summer solstice, astronomers were there. They were right there when they made that monument.
Well, that's one of the scariest, or not the scariest, but most astounding things when you consider the ancients, that they had an understanding of the precession of the equinoxes.
Exactly.
Which is what it was, 26,000 years cycle?
26,000 year cycle, 25,920 years.
How did
very long, very precise observations, and the motive to make those observations, that this was important to them, and they sought to pass down that importance to us. Very important work by two historians of science called Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschent. Back in the 60s, they wrote a book called Hamlet's Mill, which tracks this ancient knowledge of precession, and they trace it back, and this was very politically incorrect at that time, because Giorgio de Santillana was the professor of the history of science at MIT. They trace it back to what they call some almost unbelievable civilization of prehistoric antiquity that made this observation. They found the data encoded in myths and traditions all around the world. And I do go into this in Magicians of the Gods. They found it encoded as though the data were so important that it had to be passed down to the future. So the numbers that relate to precession of the equinoxes, and they're all based on the number 72 and multiples of that number. Why? Because it takes 72 years for 1 degree of precessional change to unfold. And that's like holding your finger up to the horizon. That 1 degree is just that 1 finger width of change on the horizon. Very precise observations are needed to do it. It's encoded in myths and traditions, and it looks like somebody at some point decided this information is so important, we must make sure that it stays permanently in human culture. So what we're going to do is we're going to encode it in great stories, and those stories can then be passed on by storytellers who will have an ethic that they must tell the story true. It doesn't matter whether they understand the scientific information in the story or not. All that matters is that they pass it on. And so in the oldest myths and traditions of mankind, we have compelling evidence for scientific knowledge of the phenomenon that we call the precession of the equinoxes today.
Which has been referred to by in Hamlet's Mill as the Great Year.
The Great Year. Yeah.
The Great Year.
Which is the full cycle. 25,920 years, a great circle in the heavens. It's very evident, if you've got thousands of years to watch the sky, it's very evident at the pole. Our pole star presently is Polaris, and that's just simply because the extended north pole of the Earth points most directly at that particular star in the sky. But it hasn't always pointed at Polaris because of the wobble on the axis of the Earth, and it won't always point at Polaris in the future. The pole star changes, but you need to observe the skies for very long periods of time, keep detailed records to get to grips with this phenomenon. This therefore testifies to the fact that some ancient culture was doing this in a very systematic way. It's like a ghostly fingerprint of an advanced scientific knowledge impressed upon the oldest myths and traditions of our planet.
Has it been? Has it been accepted that things like the Mayan temples were built to mirror the constellations? Is that accepted?
It's been accepted. Yeah, it is accepted because we know that the Maya were an astronomical culture, and it is accepted that they were building their temples in connection to the sky. And the whole phenomenon of the Mayan calendar, which we all heard a lot about in 2012, is another factor to take into account. The Mayan calendar, in my view, is another artifact of a lost civilization. This is that was handed down from a former people, perhaps to the Olmecs and then to the Maya who succeeded them. It's accepted, but the implications of it are not taken properly into account. Remember 21st of December 2012. There was all that fuss and nonsense about the end of the world happening then, and it didn't. But the Maya never said that. They said that the end of a great cycle happened then, which would ultimately transform the world. But what it was actually locked into, and I need to pay tribute to another researcher here, and his name is John Major Jenkins. John Major Jenkins has done fantastic work on the Mayan calendar, and decade before 2012, he was telling people, look, this is not talking about the end of the world on a specific day, on the 21st of December 2012. There's a calculation behind this, and what he showed in that calculation is that it is the position of the winter solstice sun against the background of the constellations. And what has been happening for the last 5,000 years because of precession is that the winter solstice sun, 21st of December, against the background of the constellations, has been gradually shifting towards alignment with the center of the galaxy. And that alignment happened on the 21st of December 2012, but it's not an instant, it's a window. And that window is about 80 years wide, roughly from 1960 to 2040. That was what was focused on in the Mayan calendar, a calendar that can predict eclipses of the moon 200,000 years into the future or 200,000 years into the past. Incredible, stunning accuracy, a better estimate of the length of the solar year than we use today in our modern calculations.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
High science encoded in that calendar.
Could AI help you do more of what you love? Workday is the AI platform for HR and finance that actually knows your business. We help you handle the have-to-dos so you can focus on the can't-wait-to-dos. It's a new Workday.
Why don't we just adopt the Mayan calendar? Why, if it's better than what we have, I don't...
Yeah, we're now living in the fifth age of the world, according to the Mayan
Pertained to use.
Yeah.
It may not have been.
Yeah, it's probably not good for your iPhone. Wouldn't make a good app. I bet they have a Mayan calendar.
I bet they have a Mayan calendar app.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
You can think of one half of a degree. Graham said 1 degree every 72 years, right? 1 degree within the great year is like 1 day out of the great year, right? So you could think of 72 years as basically being a human life. So an average human life is roughly like a day of the great year. That's one way, one perspective.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Now, what he said about the window is because, you can't define the center of the galaxy with an exact precise point. There's a diffuse area there, and every 72 years, the spring point is moving 1 degree, which is twice the diameter of a full moon. Full moon is a half a degree. Right.
Okay.
And I think that possibly one of the importances of monitoring, because you can't really, you can't go out and look at the sun, and say, okay, here's the sun relative to this backdrop of this constellation. However, you can look at a full lunar eclipse, and then you will know that the sun is 180 degrees around. So by monitoring lunar eclipses, you can actually position the sun quite precisely and know where it is in the sky, because obviously you can't go out and look at the sun and see what stars it's related to.
Right.
But during a lunar eclipse, it's 180 degrees, almost precisely on the other side of the Earth from the sun.
So can I just jump in for a second, because I have an image here. I don't know if we can
go
get
back tap
here, and it's this image on this side. It's a pillar richly carved, showing a.
Is that pillar 14?
That's pillar 43.
43
in enclosure D. Now I'm not going to go into it in detail now.
I've seen that online. But Jamie will find images online.
I just want to make the point, and I go into this in this book, Magicians of the Gods, that appears to be a diagram of the sky at the winter solstice in our epoch. The round dot above the vulture's wing, the round circle, represents the sun. And what we're looking at is an ancient constellation diagram. The constellations that we call Sagittarius and Scorpio stand on either side of the galactic center of the dark rift at the heart of the Milky Way, which the Maya saw as the womb of cosmic rebirth. And it's precisely that image that is depicted there. I back it up chapter and verse in the book. You'll just have to take.
Is that where we see the scorpion below?
Yeah, there's an ancient memory that there should be a scorpion in that area of the sky, and it's impressed here on this pillar.
And what are the other constellation clues?
Well, the up on the right, you'll see, first of all, see the vulture with its wings outstretched and the sun over the wing. Then go right of there, you'll see a bird. That small bird is actually the head of our constellation of Scorpio. The tail of our constellation of Scorpio overlaps the scorpion underneath the pillar. But go above the small bird, and you'll see a serpent there, a snake, and beside it another bird.
That looks like a penis.
Those represent, we call those constellations today Ophiuchus, the serpent holder, which is represented by the bird there, and we call the serpent constellation Serpens. Other constellations are also involved. This is spooky and eerie, because it appears there's overwhelming evidence that the people who made Göbekli Tepe had a profound knowledge of precession, and it appears that they deliberately sent forward into time in this time capsule a picture of the sky in our age, and that is a staggering possibility that I investigate.
I don't understand how it's in our age.
Well, it's only at the winter solstice in our age that the sun sits over the center of the galaxy. The winter solstice, in the area that the ancient Maya called the cosmic womb. There's a dark rift in the Milky Way at that point, and they saw that as the cosmic womb. So it symbolizes a moment of rebirth. And the evidence is that they'd been tracking the movement of the sun on the winter solstice, which is also the end of the year and the rebirth of the new year. They'd been tracking it to the point where they could project forward and they could envisage the sky in our epoch today. The Maya could do that, and what I'm suggesting is that's done at Göbekli Tepe.
A burst pipe, a dead water heater, the AC calling it quits. Who do you call? HomeServe is an easy way to handle unexpected home repairs, with plans covering stuff basic homeowners insurance usually won't. Instead of scrambling for a contractor, you make one call to get the repair process started. Join the millions of customers who trust HomeServe right now. Go to homeserve.com/podcast for 50% less your first year. That's homeserve.com/podcast. Savings compared to renewal price. Void in Florida.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
As well.